Okay, well, I think we're close to time. So do you want to do the big reveal? What is your backdrop, Thomas?
This is the prison scene from Porridge, the TV series
Did anyone
Porridge.
watch Porridge? No?
Yeah, love Porridge.
Well, there you go. Okay, I'm just going to do a really quick introduction. We're really lucky today to have Associate Professor Thomas Cochrane with us. He's actually at the Melbourne University now, so he's based at CSHE, which is super exciting, except that he's not really physically based at CSHE. He's stuck in Auckland. So most of Tom's belongings are in Melbourne, and Tom is in Auckland and likely to stay there for a little while. He is a leader, a mentor, an expert in the field of all things digital. And I tend to think of him now as a digital transformationalist. I'm not sure if that's how he'd claim himself, but that's how I think of him. So Tom, can I hand it over to you?
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Nikki. That was a very nice intro from you. And just for everyone's information, I'm actually remote from Auckland, from New Zealand. So Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud and flat white. And I do actually have a guest joining us as well today from Auckland, Andrew Withell. So hello, Andrew, everyone. Do you want to say hi?
Hi everyone, kia ora.
So Andrew and I have worked together quite a bit over a number of years. Andrew was head of department for product design at Unitech, Institute of Technology, and then set up the product design program at Auckland University Technology, and is now head of school, I think, isn't it, for art and design?
That's right.
So I've asked Andrew to join us and just give us a little bit of some hints, some tips around how, in particular, AUT has been sort of dealing with the idea of coming back to campus after COVID-19, and some of the practical tips around how they're sort of implementing that and perhaps in a dual mode as well. So I'll get Andrew to sort of give us a bit of a overview of that shortly. But really today, I guess I'm really wanting to have a brainstorm, have a discussion with you all. I don't have all the answers, I don't have all the ideas, but very keen to discuss ideas with you around how do we go about teaching in kind of like this hybrid, or not really keen to sort of say dual mode, of, you know, heading back to campus, particularly for practice-based types of courses. How do we do that with what could be quite a significant number of students who are still remote? And so that's kind of the brainstorm for today. I have posted into the chat a link to an Evernote note. It's just a web page note, so you don't have to have Evernote to view that, but it will pop up in your browser, or ask to open an Evernote if you do have Evernote installed. And it just has a couple of links. So just before I get into getting Andrew to give us some ideas, I'll just go into screen sharing to show you what that is. Okay, so you should see, basically it's the welcome, and there's a QR code there. So if you do have a mobile device with a camera, so a tablet or a smartphone, you can scan that QR code, and it's basically just a link to these notes. And then you could bookmark that, because it might be a useful resource for you. If you don't have a mobile device with you right now, you could just click on the link that I send in the chat. It'll take you to this page, or write down the URL, which is case sensitive. It's all lowercase in this case, apart from the numbers, of course, which are alphanumeric. And really, it's just a couple of links. So a little bit about myself. If you want to find out more about me and what I do at CSHE, which is all very new, and as Nikki said, I'm remote from Auckland at this point, so everything I'm doing is online and remote. There's a Spark presentation which gives you a bit more background about me. You might want to check that out at a later stage if you're interested. And then notes for today. We've got a Padlet, which I'd really like it to be interactive. So this is kind of a bit of a brain dump, some ideas. I've divided them up into a few categories that I'd like us to explore. And feel free to contribute to that Padlet, and we can do it live. So that would be great. You can comment, you can post in new items. If you've got ideas that you'd like to share with the rest of the group, that'd be fantastic. And I've also created a Mendeley reference library group. It just so happens that University of Melbourne has a full license for Mendeley, so we can create groups up to 100 people for sharing libraries, annotated reference libraries, etc. So I've created one there with a few items I've put there already around references that might be useful looking at this idea of COVID-19, education strategies, and particularly in hybrid modes. So let's just jump back out of screen sharing, and I'm going to get Andrew to give us a bit of a overview of what's happening with AUT, because New Zealand's a little bit further ahead than Australia as far as getting back to campus goes, and we can learn from what other people have done, which is great. I've also asked Catherine Coleman to jump in and give us ideas and feedback along the way. And keep a bit of an eye on the chat. So if you've got questions that you want to ask, feel free just to jump in, turn your audio on button. I'm probably going to miss your hand up if you're going to stick your hand up in the window, but feel free just to turn your mic on and go for it, or paste a question into the chat, and Catherine's going to keep on and relay those as they come through, which would be fantastic. So Andrew, we had a bit of a discussion last week. So around ideas, what have you done to, try to get this hybrid mode of teaching and learning going, particularly for your practical subjects, which art and design, a lot of them are studio-based, etc.
Yeah, and kia ora, everyone. I guess I'm back in my office and I see everybody here still working at home. Is that right? And obviously we're watching from here, looking at what's happening in Melbourne, and it looks like the COVID situation is actually getting a little bit worse at the moment, isn't it? So I guess I'm just not. Is everybody here in art and design type practice, or is it a bit broader than that?
This group is mainly the school, graduate school of education.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, I guess I can give a little bit of context to what we did maybe last semester. I guess the difference is we're pretty much business as usual now. This semester, students come back in 3 weeks and we're all back on campus, although potentially some augmentation of learning. So the face-to-face is augmented with some level of hybrid, although we're not really supposed to use something like blended learning as a term, because we are back here, and our students are certainly wanting to come back on campus. And that's been very clear. And I did notice at our Victoria University Wellington, where they were going to do quite a bit of online, and there was quite a bit of a pushback from students. So that was quite interesting, that the students do want the face-to-face contact. But obviously our challenge last semester was how to swing around in a literally a week initially, and then we had 4 weeks to turn what is creative practice, teaching, learning and teaching, into online learning. And I guess that's been our biggest challenge. And it took a lot of very quick thinking to turn that around and come up with what was another 6 or 8 weeks of learning that was online completely. Now for art and design, that is a huge challenge, because we have workshops and we have students that prototype and draw and make models and use a lot of online learning. And a lot of digital learning anyway, but to turn that around quite quickly without access to workshops and what have you was probably our biggest challenge. And certainly to have to do that online, and I would think that we were a little bit behind in terms of using online meetings and other things. So we had a double whammy. We had to think about how do we redesign the program to be online completely, and that's quite a big move for creative practitioners, but to do that online as well. So to figure out how we met and talked and shared and networked and created those networks was quite a big challenge. And in a school that's very distributed anyway, we have a number of different majors that are, somewhat connected, but ultimately are quite disconnected. So I can talk a little bit about what we did, Tom. Is that appropriate to talk about now?
Yeah, I think just some practical tips, ideas. What did you do to make it work? Particularly, how did you link the face-to-face groups that started filtering back, before the end of the semester, with those students that chose to be remote?
Well, all students were remote, I guess. So everybody was, online. Where the question is, how do you turn what is, the physical making that our students do to, not having the ability to make anymore? So the obvious response was to think about that, because we have studio-based learning essentially, where you come together in a physical studio and you make, but suddenly you're at home. So the initial response was to think about making as drawing, right? And, thinking about that actually you can reinterpret what is a making brief, think about industrial design or spatial design. The 3D making is a huge challenge, and to think about redesigning a project brief. And what was interesting, we were 3/4 of the way through a 6-week project, and then we had a new project. So part of that was swinging around and getting students to finish the work that they were doing in absolutely the best way possible, and being very open with the students and having great conversations with them around how do you literally stop what you're doing and finish that work up and kind of hand it in. And then, to swing around and think about the next 6 weeks as completely a rethinking. I was very, very worried about programs like fashion design, and you can imagine, fashion designers make clothing all the time. That's what they do, and think about how you would come up with a brief that didn't involve making. So drawing was the obvious response. So you can turn that into drawing, and everybody has something at home that they can literally draw with. You can paper and pen and what have you. So one of the initial response was to think completely around, thinking about drawing. The next one was the obvious, just switching into a completely digital mode. They're probably the biggest challenge with some of our students, and you'd think art and design students all had great equipment, but we soon discovered that actually there were a group of students that didn't have computer access or software access that was at the level that, because they were so used to coming into AUT and using the equipment. So there was quite a bit of work done by the university. One is to identify the students that didn't have appropriate computing power and getting computers to them, but they were pretty low spec computers. And then the other thing they did was a lot of work around remote access. So those students that didn't have the computer or the software could remote access into AUT computers. I was quite doubtful to start with, but in the end, that actually worked very, very well. So we were able to, we call it that kind of digital equity. And that was quite surprising to us, actually. And the irony was the greatest number of students that didn't have the good equipment were our digital design students.
So there was several thousand devices supplied by AUT, wasn't there?
Yeah, they got sent out, yeah, and it was quite remarkable. And to watch our IT services were all working at home to swing around and find a way of allowing, which we hadn't been done before, students to remote access into individual computers on campus, and then undertake quite complex art and design work on the computers. So that was a huge thing for us to find that actually did work. So we were able to swing around and essentially get the students to work in a much more digital design way, and kind of bring that forward. The third thing, I guess, was to think about because prototyping and making is still really important. So was to think about how you get the students to work at home, and think about the home environment as a source, that you can draw upon to start prototyping. And it's we locked down very, very quickly with very strict lockdown, but then it did start to open up a little bit. So we're able to get our students to access supermarkets so that you could actually buy some very basic prototyping gear, using cardboard and sellotape and stuff that you could find at home, which seemed to work really, really well. And I
Now,
guess
I really like that idea, Andrew, the idea of sort of going low tech with the suppliers, but also, you know, providing students with the ideas to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I guess the key here is, you know, we have quite a large technical staff, so and that was quite a big challenge, you know, because they're all used to working in the workshop. So the first thing that we were able to do is just kind of hold them off a little bit while we work with the academic staff to, one, giving them the kind of emotional support and, you know, just helping them reframe the thinking about learning, but then start to organise the redesign of projects and deal with the existing projects underway, but also then to have conversations with our technical staff to think about how they could swing in. And I wouldn't say swing in behind the academic staff, but think about much more around a partnership so that they could actively join in online so we actually divvied up all the technical staff across the various programs, and they were able to provide extra support around that kind of drawing and homemaking, so they could actually go away and do a whole lot of work and find resources online. And what was quite interesting was that you know, we were about 3 or 4 weeks behind what was happening in Europe, and there were a lot of art and design schools going through the same thing. And we were lucky actually to have someone from Ireland, the University of Limerick, who had arrived here to do a sabbatical, and he had great kind of networks back into his university. So he was passing us what the University of Limerick School of Art and Design were going through or had gone through.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, is, you know, learn from other people who've gone through it. So that's pretty key, yeah. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah,
but I guess the lesson there was really around, partly around negotiation. And, you know, people are quite fearful about jobs and impacts of all this stuff on them. And, you know, just thinking that, you know, reframing their thinking so that they could swing in and work in a much tighter partnership with the academic staff, but also we provided a kind of a vehicle where students could also reach out directly to the technicians, so that if they've got, you know, some issue or some things that they were doing at home, they could talk directly to the technicians, and our technicians could, you know, sort of give them that level of support around the making remotely. And that actually worked really well. So that, you know, I think that was actually a bridge building, you know, that we learned a lot about each other through that process. In terms of, you know, just getting to know what strengths and weaknesses are that we wouldn't have known otherwise, and, you know, in terms of a lot of kind of communication.
Cool. Are there any questions for Andrew at this point? Andrew has to head off soon. He doesn't have a lot of time. That's why I brought him in to give us a few ideas to start with.
I guess my question, Andrew, would be, because I know you're not actually going through quite the same process as we are at the moment. We're going to have students at uni and we're going to have students at home. We have a class of, let's say, 16 students, and out of those, 8 might stay home, 4 might come in, who knows, you know, and at this stage we really don't know. Within the classrooms, we've been told we still have to do our social distancing. So, for example, we can't even pass a whiteboard marker between students.
Yeah.
That's problematic. And then on top of that, we're trying to provide an equity within the service and make sure that everybody has the chance to have the very best options here. And the concerns of the staff that I speak to are, how do I support both those groups in a really positive way? How can I bring the people who are stuck at home into my classroom? And how do the people in the classroom experience the remote still as well? So did you have anything that might help us with that component?
And I guess, you know, the first thing is just the workload on staff, right? Because they've got to do a dual mode. And, you know, what we're learning is, you've probably learned the same thing, is the barrier of an online is very different to the face-to-face. One is it's hard work for the staff, right? Because, you know, these online meetings, one is you've got to do a lot more prep, but you read the language of people quite differently. So, you know, the literature's shown that actually an online meeting is far harder because you're not reading the body language. So then you have to reconcile that with having students, you know, physically there and provide. I don't have any, I guess it's just being very open in the discussions with the various groups around what that means for them. You know, and I think that was the best thing that we did, is just, you know, trying to be as completely transparent with the students about the types of experiences that they were having. The other thing was very interesting in terms of, we're just assessing the work that was all done completely remotely. And we actually found, I don't know if you guys have found that, the spreads have got bigger. The students that are good in many ways have done as well or even better than they would have had normally, but the students that have struggled have actually struggled more. And I guess to me that's quite a lesson, and there's actually some opportunity here, and it's talking through the experiences online, at home, are different for different students, but for some students it actually works better for them. And, you know, and for other students, they need to work face to face. So talking about the opportunities for the students that are working remotely and framing that as something really, really positive, and talking about the positives and negatives, but framing it as something really positive. You can be really productive. You can work digitally. You can have a different type of experience. And in some ways you can connect better online. And I think making sure that that is reiterated to the students is incredibly
Yeah, I think that's a good
important.
point, Andrew, that it's made clear to the students that that are remote, that they're not getting a second-hand experience or a poorer experience.
And talking that up is really, really important. I guess that the other side to that is just managing the students on campus as well. And I don't know if the class is happening at the same time, or can you break the groups up? Because that's, you know, we've got a little bit of that happening now, where we do have some students now. VC has made a commitment that we will honour all students, because a lot of our students have gone to the provinces, and for financial reasons and other things, they won't be back on campus. So we are doing a little bit of that, where we'll be managing students remotely and on campus. And, you know, is that happening in the same class, or you can start breaking the classes up?
Most of our classes that are coming back are smaller numbers, and they will be running at the same time. So it will be 20 students, 5 of whom are at home, 15 of whom come in, or vice versa.
Yeah, and the large groups will still be basically all online.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think, you know, it's interesting, you know, running all these meetings online is easy, and having a face-to-face meeting online, and a face-to-face meeting is easy. What I found most difficult is when some of the staff have been at home and some of them have been in the office. And I find managing both online and face-to-face, it gets really, really difficult, because you know, when you're in the class or in a meeting, you're reading a lot of that real-time stuff, and trying to keep the people online in the mix and in the class is incredibly difficult. And I think just thinking through a kind of a set of guidelines around making sure that the voice is heard, and the hand is raised, and that the eye-to-eye contact is kept up is probably, to me, the most important thing, so that that's managed, because you've got two different things running simultaneously. I don't know if you guys have found that. No, because you're not in at work, you're all at home.
Yeah, not yet. It'll be for next semester, which is coming up in August. But I think that's the key thing, Andrew, is really designing whatever engagement activities that you're doing that really bring in the remote students, so they're part of that, rather than just live streaming what you're doing with a face-to-face student. So all the remote students getting is a passive, you know, watching experience. That certainly is a second best experience. So trying to think through how you can really integrate the remote students into what you're doing face-to-face directly.
And I wonder, because I'm interested in the kind of collaborative projects, and, you know, if you've got two groups, one online and one physically, do you mix them up, or do you keep them separate? Would be an obvious one. My natural thinking about it would be to mix them up, so that you've got some in the group face to face and some online, if you're doing a lot of collaborative work.
Yeah, and I've certainly done that with a lot of international projects that we've done. And if I think even back to Unitec, when you were there, Andrew, we did those various projects with between the product design students at Unitec in Auckland and the Island students, and they were in Limerick at that point. And they created these mixed teams, and it gave them basically a real world experience of working in a global team.
The counter to what I was saying before about the advantage of the online, which, you know, is great. I think we also learned a lot about that digital equity, and how many students and staff struggle because of their own personal circumstances at home. And that's been a big eye-opener for us. And we have all these assumptions around, you know, one was that it's quite cold here at the moment, and when you're at home, you are quite cold. Often our houses aren't heated that well, and we sort of forget that, you know, like these students are struggling, and then they've got siblings, and maybe there's only one computer, and they're negotiating time on the computer's slow, or the internet access. And I guess just thinking through the equity issues and having discussions with the students. And I presume you've already done that, but I think it will be highlighted when you've got these two groups. You know, there's a lot of disadvantages of being at home as well for many students. And, you know, asking students how they're going and how they're feeling and that kind of emotional stuff was incredibly important. And no one often wants to, really, be really openly honest about the difficulties that they're having at home. And that might be something to think through as well. How do you open up those sort of conversations with those students and their individual lived experiences that are online? I suppose the other thing is then, assessment is an important part of that as well. And having just been through the complete online learning is, how do you acknowledge, you've got two groups, that might have quite different experiences in a project, or when they come to examination, if you have exams, how do you balance that sort of stuff? How do you acknowledge that some circumstances have been very, very difficult? We have a university across the road here that essentially scaled all their grades on the online. AUT took quite a different approach, and we were really just had a set of kind of criteria that we used as almost like a lens to look at the project work that came through. You could probably say that we were more generous, but certainly what I would say is that encouraging staff to look at holistically at the experience of student, acknowledge the difficulties that they had to complete the work as well. So I think that's a really interesting kind of thing to think about.
Yeah, it's probably quite manageable because most of these courses, the classes that will be held on campus will be small, and that's why they're being done that way, is because they're smaller groups. So, adding an element of student negotiation into the assessment process, or, feedback on did their peers actually contribute as much as they should have, etc., to a group project, I think, is doable, and that's when you're working in smaller groups.
Can I ask, has the digital equity thing come up for you guys, and how's that been managed at the University of Melbourne?
We'll throw it open to someone. Catherine.
Students were actually able to apply for scholarships when it first began.
Oh, yeah.
And I had some students that required that. The biggest thing was that so I teach art and design, many of my students were actually, by the Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning that I taught them, running out of data because of being in Zoom lectures all day Monday and Tuesday mornings. And so it was, for me, ditching Zoom altogether because they couldn't afford the data packs they were having to buy each week.
And the synchronous video is data hungry,
Yeah, and Zoom takes up a lot. So, but the university did provide some scholarships for them to apply. It also enabled them to, if they needed to apply for a larger scholarship to actually buy computers that they might need at home.
Do you think all students were able to access that, or did you feel like some students still, there were some equity issues that you may...
I think there have been massive equity issues that haven't properly really been investigated. I just know from my students what I was able to do, and I put out a survey really quickly to find out what they had, because that did worry me, knowing what they were like in my class, so that I could see what they had. But it was problematic, and not all of them wanted to apply because they were concerned about extra loans when they'd already just lost their jobs.
Yeah, and their family situation too is the thing that we're learning around too. It's not just them losing their jobs, but family situations,
and extra debt.
Well, and knowing the sort of emotional stress that they're under is a big part of that. Alongside that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Huge.
Well, I'm going to go back to the Padlet, and thank you, Andrew. That's great.
I'll head off now. Hopefully we've just got something going anyway.
Yeah. Great thoughts. Thank you. And I think one of the key things, part of the takeaway would be, leverage what people have learned. So if you've got colleagues in other universities, particularly in Europe, UK, New Zealand, that have been through what you're about to go through, then pick their brains. have a chat with them and see what strategies they've come up with. So thanks Andrew.
Tom. Everyone, take care.
So I just want to have a look at this Padlet. So I've popped the link to the Padlet into the chat, and I'll just jump into screen sharing and have a bit of a look through some of the ideas that we kind of brain dumped into the Padlet, and Catherine's been contributing to this. I've used a bit of the hive mind approach and used the Escalate Mobile Learning Special Interest Group to help populate this over the last couple of weeks, give us some sort of ideas. And certainly welcome anyone here to contribute to this as well. So you can just comment on items. If there's stuff that you think's really good, you can rate it. So you can give a star rating. So there's 5 stars on this one here, for instance. Or you should be able to actually add items to these columns if there's specific things, ideas that you've already got. You click on the plus sign and then you can just type or paste or even attach a document to it. So I've tried to basically come up with a few key categories. So the first column there is models and frameworks, looking at some possible models and frameworks that could potentially be useful to speak into this sort of situation. One of the key concepts I think that'll be very relevant is the idea of networked learning communities. So I've made that into a column because effectively what you're going to be doing with a face-to-face and a remote group is creating a learning community that is effectively a network using technology to be able to enable that. Then looking at various strategies, so asynchronous type strategies, so strategies that don't have to happen at the same time. And that's where web-based tools and the LMS, etc., are particularly powerful to be able to enable that. And they're particularly powerful for students who need perhaps a little bit more time to reflect. And certainly for students whose first language is not English, they tend to find asynchronous strategies very powerful. There's a lot you can do synchronously as well. And part of that issue will be, as Catherine was saying, you can do synchronous activities, but you've got to be careful of how much data you're using while you're doing those. So synchronous video might not be the best approach, but there's various ways you can approach synchronous activities. Looking at some ideas around lab and practical type of class strategies and how they perhaps map into your particular context. Once again, studio-based type strategies, very practical sort of based learning environments. How do we make those kind of a hybrid mode? Just some ideas there. And a concept which I find is very simple, but it seems to be is quite powerful, is an idea around designing learner-centric ecologies of resources. And the idea really is just creating a group of tools that work well together. And so an ecology really is a fine balance. So ecologies die when you get a predator come in that's not native to the ecological system and destroys everything, etc. And so ecologies are a fine balance, and the idea of an ecology of resources is that you choose an appropriate set of tools in a toolkit that work well. All those tools work together well. And it's just a simple idea, but it's kind of like, well, there's not one tool that does everything. So you can't just say, well, let's just do everything in Canvas, because Canvas doesn't do everything well. So you might say, well, if we're wanting to share video, perhaps YouTube is the best tool to use, or Vimeo, or whatever's actually appropriate to your context. And then create this group, this ecology of tools that can speak together. And for me, that's a big reason perhaps why not to use Facebook, because Facebook is a world on its own. And what it tries to do is just keep you in Facebook. And so it actually makes it really difficult to link in external tools into Facebook. I know some people do use Facebook very effectively, but I choose not to, because I think it's a social space. And it's not actually social media by definition. It's because it's its own ecosystem. It doesn't have a long tail. It doesn't reach out and allow you to bring in other tools easily. And so it's not, it's its own ecology. It doesn't link to other stuff very well. And then we've got some suggested resources, which includes the Mendeley group there. If I just go to that group. Here's the Mentally group. I've invited a few people so far to contribute to this. And if you'd like to be invited into this group, then just email me and I'll add you as a member of the stuff that you'd like to add there. So this is really about creating a shared reference library that's relevant to this type of discussion. So trying to make this relatively underpinned by scholarship and academic as well. And then finally, I've got a column for questions. So if there's some questions that you'd like to ask directly within the Padlet, you could add those there if you like. I'll probably just have to remember to refresh regularly. So some of the models and frameworks that might be relevant. There's a nice post by Tony Bates, who's he's pretty much semi-retired now, but has been in educational technology for most of his working career and has a wealth of knowledge, and he openly shares his ideas. So he has a lot of stuff online that you can find, several ebooks that are free, and it's really good. It's a really good mix. It's a pragmatic mix of theory and practice, and so he will underpin everything he's doing with theory, but will then give you practical ways of how do I apply this. So if you're looking for stuff to read to really frame what you're doing from a theoretical standpoint that's based on learning theory, but is actual practical as well, then I recommend anything by Tony Bates. So there's a link there to an article that he's talking about. Obviously he's in America, American based. Actually, I think he might be Canadian. And the coming fall semester and what people can possibly do to make that work, particularly in a hybrid sort of blended mode. Ideas around universal design for learning are particularly important for what you're doing. So it basically becomes inclusive for all students. So kind of think, how can you include the remote students, what you're doing face to face? Don't just sort of think of them as an add-on. Whatever activities you're trying to design for next semester, really make them part of it. So start with that as a bit of a prerequisite, really. There's a good article there on from Ecologies. Ecologies is one of the big, I guess, societies around educational technology in the US. So I've tried to give you links to articles from Europe, from US, from UK, New Zealand and Australia as well. So there's a bit of a balance of where these ideas are coming from. The concept of flipping the classroom is pretty relevant to what you're doing as well. So with, not just the face-to-face students and not just the fully online students, but thinking, how can you flip the classroom to enhance that for both? I've got an example here from one of my colleagues at AUT. He's looking very happy there. And this is Stephen Aiello. He's actually a paramedic lecturer. So he's recorded a little 9-minute overview of his experience of flipping the classroom into last year to this semester, the impact of that and the impact on his practice, the impact on his students. And a couple of the key takeaways, because I've had a couple of conversations with Stephen, is that basically it was a lot of upfront work, but now by using a flipped classroom model, he finds that he has a lot more flexibility, he has a lot more time to engage with students in discussions because the content's there online. He's made little sort of chunks of information and allows students to be able to be self-paced. He started
can I talk to this one a little bit as well, if that's okay? So I'm going to share my screen if no, I can't because you're already doing it.
You co-host,
no, that's okay. No, it's fine. Essentially, I do flipped classroom at the moment, so I teach online entirely, but I do choose a flipped classroom mode because we used to run face-to-face and online. So I was stuck in a kind of a hybrid model myself for a year. And so what we have moved to is a very flipped classroom approach. We put all of the resources that the students will need to take part in any activity on Canvas or online in some format, so that everyone has access to all the same materials. And then we do have a once a week catch up where we have, you know, an hour and a half. Now, because we're now entirely online, we do it only in Zoom. We used to do it part online, part face to face. And there's a question coming. The problem we had was when we tried to run Zoom in a classroom, we ended up with sound feedback issues. So we couldn't have sound on. Now, this was a few years ago, so it may have changed. We couldn't have sound on all of the computers, so that the people who weren't in the classroom, who were remote, could actually take part in the classroom as if they were there. So, you know, you'd have them on their phone or you'd have them on a computer, but the sound issues were too much if the students in the room also had their computers open and Zoom on. I'm wondering if anyone's come across that issue and how to solve it. Other than that, the flipped mode for me has been fantastically successful, and the students have loved it because they have felt that they can dip in and out at any time in the week. They know exactly what's coming up, and then they either come to the class, or if they can't come to the class, in our case it's all recorded, and they can also see the sorts of things that have been discussed and take part in the discussion groups and in the different collaboration ports. So flipped learning, I think, has real possibilities for those of us who are about to be on campus and not on campus. You know,
and that's a good point around the audio. So that's a kind of a just a basic, but something that perhaps people don't think about is when you're.
I hadn't.
When you're remote, the key thing is not so much the video, but the audio. And if you're getting audio feedback or the audio is really poor quality, it's a really poor experience for the remote students. So I guess the strategies that I've used is sort of treat the classroom, the physical face-to-face classroom, as basically one participant. And so have perhaps the lecturer's laptop or device connected to the projector screen up the front so everyone can see it as a large group. And the webcam on that is then just the one webcam and the one audio source that is going out to all the remote students. And then the other remote students are all, you know, tiled on the screen as individuals, but effectively the face-to-face class is like one participant. And then you get students to, you know, have you got a question, and they come up closer to the microphone, etc. It's problematic when everyone's got their own device in the same acoustic environment. You do get audio feedback, and that's really off-putting. Yep. So that's just one strategy I've used, is basically just have one connected device in the face-to-face classroom, and treat it more like a performance type of thing, where this is just one participant. And that way it also gives an equal footing to the remote students. They don't sort of feel like, well, there's 50 participants compared to my one. It's like, well, that's one and I'm one, etc., etc. So it kind of gives a bit more of a democratic approach to the remote students as well.
Sorry, can I ask a follow-on question? And anyone else can just tell me to be quiet and speak up. Therefore, when you put them into groups, so when I had them with multiple screens, I could put them into groups where I would have one person in the Zoom room, like they could work with one person physically looking at them. Do you know what I mean? So you'd have 3 actual people sitting at a table and one computer screen taking part in that group conversation. But I'm presuming if you go the way you've just suggested, Tom, the people who are in Zoom go into their own breakout rooms, so they're only ever working with other people remotely.
No, you could. I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head here, Nikki. I mean, perhaps in that case, then what you do is when you're dividing the physical students up into groups, they actually go into different spaces.
Okay.
So particularly if you're social distancing,
well,
then
I don't know if we're allowed to. Are you allowed to go into different spaces, everyone, or do you have to stay in the same place all the time with the way it's worked? Have you had guidelines yet?
Yes, you're in the same space. You're in the room that you are timetabled to only.
Okay.
Okay, what about just heading outside in groups of 3 or something with their smartphone and interacting that way, possibly?
Yeah, maybe.
If possible.
Or in the corridor, you know?
I think it's the time to actually think about your ecologies of practice. So to actually think about what a parallel Teams class looks like, to get out of Zoom that's already probably sucked up a bucket load of their grocery money, and to think about a lower bandwidth, so a collaboration in Canvas, that actually lets you collab live in OneDrive or in Google Drive, to use the Teams collaboration spaces.
Yeah, so it's actually more
and to
text-based,
change the
etc.
practice.
Yeah, rather than relying on the video, which...
Well, you can meet now in Zoom, in Teams. Meet Now is actually pretty low bandwidth video, and Meet Now enables students to use the chat function to Meet Now, so they could have a group that's set up in Teams and do a quick Meet Now video, which doesn't take up the same space as Zoom does.
Yeah, good ideas.
Thanks, Kate.
So just coming back to Steve with his flipped classroom feedback. So he's found basically now he's got a lot more time to engage with sort of thinking through discussions in class, etc. And also as far as the impact on student learnings go, what he found was that it brought up the bottom end. So that the whole sort of bell curve for a student, you know, their marks has actually gone up. It's gone up the scale. So the bottom students have basically improved, and perhaps the top students haven't improved as much, but it certainly brought up the bottom end of that bell curve for him in the students' assessments. There's a couple of other ideas there under models and frameworks. This one I quite like. It's a very simple concept. Think about three things to consider when you're designing remote teaching: student to content interaction, student to student interaction, and lecturer, academic, educator to student interaction. So there's just a really nice little diagram there on Figshare, which just outlines a few tips around how to do that. So I'd recommend that. Have a look at that. That's quite nice. And I think try to sort of think in a hybrid mode, not dual as such. Try to think it as a mixed mode, not as doing two things at once, but as one thing that you're actually designing. And some of the key things. This is a little ebook that Catherine actually shared earlier, and I've just popped it in there from Microsoft. And I can't say I'm a big Microsoft fan, but what they've put into this little booklet here is really good practical advice, and basically sort of saying that using hybrid mode, you can actually amplify learning. Technology can amplify learning when it's applied in the right way, accelerate and connect, and allow you to hook into a global learning community as well. So some good tips in that ebook. I wanted to drop across to this top of the synchronous strategies here, because this is a key thing that I just really wanted to highlight. Was when you're looking at designing, blended learning, really look at it as online first. Think about the online experience first, rather than sort of thinking as the online experience as the add-on. And that way, by designing for the online experience, your face-to-face students get an enhanced experience, and the online students get a really good experience as well, rather than let's just zoom out to them or record the session and then they can watch it later, which is not a great experience. There's a nice little quote here from the link from Bera, which is in the UK. We should recognise that what's good for the remote student is likewise good for those in the face-to-face learning as well. So I think that's a key concept. Is think about when you're designing activities, if you're thinking about a blended sort of mode, think about online first, and then bring that online activity into the face-to-face environment. So if you're doing a discussion forum say on Canvas for the remote students, or just bring that up on the projector live with your face-to-face students and get them to engage live in that discussion. Bring that online activity into the face-to-face environment. Make it really explicit that way. Does that make sense? So that's kind of a key concept that I really wanted to highlight is think about the online experience first whenever you're designing these activities for next semester. Some ideas around networked learning. So my suggestion would be kind of rethink the classroom and the remote students as like a networked learning community. it's a learning community that's connected via technology. And there's a couple of links there, some examples. Catherine Cronin, who did her PhD basically on networked learning, has a lot of really good resources, some great presentations, some great publications, if you want to get some hints from her. And there's a few other resources there as well. So there's a keynote that Catherine did in 2014, which you might find interesting. That's hosted on YouTube by ALT, the Association for Learning Technology in the UK. And she's done a lot of work since then as well. So check out some of the stuff that she's done. I won't play it right now. Another thing that you can do, which I quite often do, particularly for even face-to-face students, is get a sense of where they're from geographically. And a simple way to do that is use, say, Google Maps. So I quite often will create my own map using My Maps. You just log into your Gmail account, go to mymaps.google.com. You can create your own custom collaborative map, get your students to put themselves on the map, and link to some sort of physical context that's relevant to them, whether it be this is my birthplace, or where I'm from, or this is the school that I'm working with. It doesn't have to be their home address, because you don't want people going around going and trolling people, but some sort of geographical relevance to what you're doing, and just gives a real sense of geography. If you can put that onto a collaborative Google map, and those can be private or they can be public. And often what I'll do is I'll make the map actually public, but I will allow participation by invitation only. So for example, let's see, here it is. For my course currently, which is all online, it has to be because I'm here in New Zealand, for facilitating online learning, I've just asked the students to put themselves onto a map. Gives me some sort of idea of where they're from. They're all, academics based in Melbourne, but you can see we've got this global representation of where people are from. It's really quite, interesting to get an idea of the global representation and the types of cultures that are brought into this class. Very simple tool to do, and you can share it. This course has only been going 5 weeks. We've had 1,230 views of this map, and we haven't even advertised it. We haven't gone out of our way to advertise it, but it's kind of like those sorts of stats as well. If you're using online tools, you have analytics in the background, which can be really interesting for people, and saying, well, why would I create this custom map? Well, because people are viewing it. People are finding it interesting. So although there's like 20 people in the class, we've had, 1,200 other people look at this map, which is, can be quite motivating. So just one tip, one thing to do. You can also use, say, Google Street View. And this is something that people can contribute to wherever they are, either when they're face-to-face or remote, using your smartphone, the camera on your phone. Oops, it's kind of custom taking it out because it's purple. That was the only color I could get, was purple. And using the Google Street View app on your phone, you can create 360-degree images of a particular location and then share them on Google Street View, which can be quite powerful as well. So your remote students can contribute to a map. Your face-to-face students can as well. Some asynchronous strategies. There's just a few articles here with tips, etc. I think maybe useful. Big theme that we've sort of been throwing at you is maybe think beyond Zoom. And there's a lot of reasons to do that. Catherine's really sort of been hammering on that nail, but I think that's really important to get through, is let's just not rely on Zoom. There's a lot of other tools that you can use. So one of my favorites is Twitter. May not be everyone's favorite or cup of tea, but I've certainly found it quite powerful to engage in a global community, and even doing it face to face. using Twitter face-to-face. So under the Synchronous Strategies, I've also got Twitter there, but just a couple of ideas on how to do it live, how to use Twitter live. So you can have back channel. So that back channel can either be hidden, and maybe you have someone moderating it, just like I've asked Catherine to sort of look after the chat for me. So you could have a student or a group of students effectively assigned as moderators for your Twitter back channel, or whatever tool you want to use as a kind of a text-based back channel, discussion channel. And bring it into the classroom live via a tool such as Twitterful. So you can sign up for Twitterful for free. And if you've got dual screens, particularly in the classroom, you can have the back channel communication happening on one screen, and the whatever you're presenting on the other screen as well at the same time, and it can be incredibly engaging. But if you are going to do that, you really need to engage with that back channel. You can't just let it have a life of its own, because that's when sometimes it can backfire, and particularly say if your remote students are finding what you're doing boring or disengaging, they might comment on that, and it could backfire on you quite significantly, as it has at some conferences. So you really need to, if you're going to use a back channel, work with it, bring it into what you're doing, okay? And that idea of performance, by making it live on a second screen, or I've done this before with, say, a mobile screen on wheels, and it can be really powerful, and those mobile students can have a voice into the classroom by doing that live. Once again, you need someone to follow that, moderate that, reply to it, particularly if you're mainly thinking at that point of the face-to-face students, then you need to have someone else engaging with the back channel. So Twitter, I think, fits under both asynchronous and synchronous. So because it's basically a microblog, it can be done at different times as well. So just a few thoughts there. Some ideas from Neil Cowie, actually from Japan. He teaches languages in Japan. So he's got some useful advice there, and he's got a little video. This is his specialty on making instructional videos. So he's got an instructional video on how to do it, which might be really useful for you to have a look at. Catherine's suggested forums there. Do you want to talk to that, Catherine?
I think that forums are a lovely way to think a different way about blogging. So I don't like forums used for chat, and the lovely thing about Canvas is that it has its own chat function. But using a discussion board or forum to actually blog post or vlog, which you can do really nicely, and you use video logs or podcast logs inside Canvas, so that you generate your discussion, but in a number of different ways and modes that actually suit students, either, and that they can do it at any time that they choose, as long as you're moderating. I actually ask my students to moderate, and one or two of them will actually be that moderator for that week. So it's their job to actually go in and make sure that they are also responding to everybody. But that you get this really interesting conversation happening if you think about it as a forum and not as a board where you kind of dump things and then punitively suggest that it's got to be a certain number of words and you must do 2 or you can't reply. That kind of stuff is not very generative. But thinking about it differently in writing with each other, I have found is a really nice way, particularly video. The little screenshots out my window were nice things. So just like you talking about video outside, my students did the same thing. What's it look like outside today? Post it in the forum so that we could have a chat around what they were seeing. Was a different way of thinking about what that could, give as an option to us. Cool.
So an idea I've seen presented on several times at conferences, and there is a bit of literature around it now as well, is perhaps an assignment around getting your students to become Wikipedia editors. So finding an article that's relevant to whatever you're discussing at that point, and assigning a team of students become editors of an article in Wikipedia around that. And so that quickly sort of pushes them into becoming a bit of an expert in that area, being able to go and critique what is currently on that topic on Wikipedia. Is it true? Is it not? Or is it just a bunch of alternative truths like Trump speak? So, and that way they also get to give back to the global community and can actually feel like they're actually doing something real world. So just a suggestion, some sort of activity maybe, and this can be done by face-to-face and remote students, becoming editors of a Wikipedia article, or the creators if there isn't currently one there. I've got some suggestions around how teams of students can collaborate on remote video production. So there are quite a few tools around, particularly mobile tools, mobile apps that you can use to get groups of students that are dispersed geographically to actually co-create a video. And so they can shoot a little video clip, perhaps of where they are in their bedroom or outside their room or whatever. Maybe there's some sort of theme around the video you're trying to get them to create. Maybe it's an instructional video that you would then use in the classroom, or it's around a particular education topic. The students all create a little clip that's relevant to that, and then you can create a movie by bringing all those clips together. So one very simple to do that's VQuick. A slightly more higher end tool is Frame.io, and this article then has a whole lot of different ones, including things like Premiere and Logic Pro, the Apple video editor, which I can't quite remember the name of right now. Catherine kind of mentioned this one before, various student team management tools, thinking beyond video. How can you get students to interact in groups? Well, there's a lot of tools you can use, basically team management tools like Microsoft Teams, Trello, Slack, Basecamp. There's a whole variety of them. And I like tools that are multi-platform, so it gives students the choice of what device they can use and use their own devices for these. So I tend to choose tools that have a mobile app, but then also accessible via a web interface if they're sitting at a desktop or a laptop. So it does involve a little bit of exploration by you as to if you're suggesting students use Trello or another tool, check it out yourself to start with. And just because there's a new interesting tool that's popped up on the news feeds, don't go and recommend it until you checked it out. Particularly if it's a freebie and it might be ad supported, and some of those ads might not be that particularly great. So you don't want to be pulling up in Classroom a freebie tool that has nasty stuff attached to it that you hadn't looked at before. So check these tools out. These ones are all safe, but perhaps some emerging tools might be used in various nefarious ways that you might want to check out first. So the same sorts of tools are available for audio collaboration, creating a shared audio track, whether that be a conversation, an interview, an actual soundtrack. Get students to collaborate remotely on creating some form of audio. So once again, thinking beyond just video. So some synchronous strategies. We've kind of already jumped into that. Really, the idea is think about online first. And there's a few ideas there. Tom Worthington from ANU has given some useful feedback on that idea there, which is great. Talking about the need for scaffolding, etc. He also points out that that the physical room is not always equitable as well. So quite often we will, prevalence those students who actually give us feedback face to face and put their hand up and talk all the time. So, is the face to face environment necessarily best anyway for our quieter students? Another idea maybe around live streaming, using some live streaming tools, and perhaps once again This could be assigned to a student or group of students. So the face-to-face students live streaming their activity to the remote students using their smartphone. It's got a great camera on it. There's some really simple live streaming tools that you can use. If you're into using Twitter, Periscope's probably the choice. It's the live streaming tool that's built into Twitter now for video. Twitch, which is basically a game streaming platform, but a lot of people use it for a whole lot of different types of activities now because it's just such a robust platform. Google Meet, etc. There's a whole variety of tools that you could use for live streaming that are perhaps a little bit less bandwidth than Zoom. So the other key thing that I'd like to sort of point out is really focus on student activity, not just you as the teacher. Think about how you can design engaging activities that your students are doing, and it's about them sharing what they're doing rather than just a delivery of content. And perhaps this audience that I'm talking to knows all this stuff already because you are education based, but just wanted to point that out. Tom Worthington does make the note that perhaps less experienced students will need more scaffolding when you're asking them to do that. So just as the idea of getting your face-to-face students to live stream their activity to the remote students, you can get the remote students to stream back into the class what they're doing as well. And say, hey, Fred, over in wherever you are at home, show us what you're doing right now, and we'll stream it back into class. And quite often we've used this for student remote presentations as well. So perhaps there's a presentation activity that you're wanting students to do. They can do that in class, stream it out to the remote students. The remote students can stream their presentation back into the class and get peer feedback as well. So Kate has some more good advice. Do you want to talk us through that, Kate?
What was it about? Oh, it's just a great little statement on being careful around the kinds of interaction that you're doing. So they say interaction sparingly. I say bang for buck, knowing how much it costs to actually pay for data. And so if you want your students to actually pay extra money to participate, then I want it to be really worthwhile. And that's, anyone I work with, that language of bang for buck is really important, and then they remember it. They're already paying to participate in your class and engage in your class, but they're now going to pay something extra on top of that to be synchronous. So it's just something for us to remember. If we had a look at our bills at home, they would already be pretty huge. If we think about being a student in that, I think it's pretty problematic to be doing really high bandwidth learning. But if it's bang for buck, then it's totally worth it, and they get it because you've been explicit around that. But It's just a really lovely statement from MSD. I think it was a good thing for that faculty to actually say. Yeah.
And I think even, if you've got an unlimited data plan, unlimited normally comes with strings as well. It's unlimited at full bandwidth for a certain amount, and then it slows down, doesn't it? Generally,
or it charges you money, which I have discovered during the pandemic, as I've hit an extra $50 that it just took off my credit card in the first few months.
Yeah. So unlimited is not necessarily actually unlimited. We've got quite a funny ad. It's one of the telcos uses here in New Zealand, where they talk about unlimited and they just keep on saying it's unlimited. Anyway, so while Catherine was talking about the use synchronous interaction sparingly, it just reminded me, going back to the idea of asynchronous tools such as Twitter, and perhaps one of the reasons to use these types of tools is the way that you can use them to analyze and even bring that analysis into the class. So this is a tool called Tags Explorer, which is a free tool developed by Martin Hawksey from Alt in the UK. And it basically uses a special version of Google Forms to search for hashtags, for Twitter hashtags. So when you're using Twitter, instead of having to follow a whole bunch of students, or students follow you, what you do is you create a hashtag for the class. So, for example, my class with flexible on learning. The hashtag is #EDUC90970 because that's the course number. And no one else is using that online at the moment, because why would they? Because it doesn't mean anything to them. So that's a relatively unique hashtag. And then you can search via that hashtag any information around Twitter or social media. So in this case, this tool allows me to explore the conversation that's happening in this class around the hashtag. And we've only been going a few weeks, and most of the students weren't on Twitter, and so it's a relatively small group at this point. But other projects I've done, have effectively a huge Death Star of interaction. But this one's just developing. You can see the locus there at this point is myself. So the larger the node, the larger the name, is the more activity. And I would expect that at the start that the instructor is probably the most active, because you're modeling experience. But what I like about this tool is we can do things like, okay, Paula's been tweeting a fair amount. If I click on her node, it gives me a list of all her tweets. And I've got other tools up the top here. I can see who the top tweeters are. It's currently myself and then Paula. That may not necessarily mean a whole lot, because you can tweet in broadcast mode and it's not actually a conversation. And so the next thing across here is top conversationalist, which is actually focusing on who's interacting using Twitter. And that comes through mentions and through retweets, etc. And so you're creating this conversation. And so you can kind of gamify the use of a tool like Twitter, using these types of analysis tools and pulling it up in class and saying, okay, this week Paul is the top conversationalist, and Daniel might go, oh, well, I want to be the top conversationalist next week, so I better get tweeting more, etc. And kind of gamify the use of these tools. Of course, you need to put some sort of educational framework around what they're tweeting, etc. And so I'm asking them to tweet their reflective posts from their e-portfolios, and to tweet the links to their YouTube videos that they're creating, etc. The other thing I like about this tool, it gives us other analysis perspectives as well. So if I look at Paula's tweets here, I can replay her tweets like a little video, and it shows me a little timeline, shows me the build-up of the community, the build-up of the interactions, and it just becomes a real rich sort of experience of how did this conversation on Twitter and this community sort of start building up. And by just pulling this up in class and showcasing it, hopefully it gets people engaged as well. And you can start to see the conversation grow beyond myself and Paula as we move along. So yeah, just another reason for using something like Twitter and using the built-in analytics to be able to bring that rich data back into the class as well. It's quite a nice article here from, I don't even know how to say their name, Zaya Pregesarazan. It's kind of like the longest name ever. But they've got a really nice, very pragmatic article on tips and tools for COVID-19 strategies. And there's been a fair bit published recently where journals have actually been publishing data and information around COVID-19 strategies and getting it out there so that people can actually learn from it. And this is just one of those articles if I open it up. He's got some very nice pragmatic ideas there, and there may be some of those that resonate with you. So have a flick through those. I think there's some good ones. Some of them we've already talked about, using Google Docs, etc. Watch and learn. So he's got a whole variety of examples, and I particularly like his examples around students as creators of learning resources. Some other ideas. You can transfer face-to-face activities into virtual reality or immersive reality scenarios. And it may sound like something that's really hard to do, something that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. Well, it doesn't have to. You can do this very much on a budget shoestring or even for free. So we've used a tool called SeekBeak, and I think I've put the link there to SeekBeak. And basically SeekBeak gives you a free trial version which lasts forever, but it gives you 3 immersive environments, 3 snaps they call it. So a snap is like a virtual environment, and you can create the 360-degree environment using, for example, your smartphone with the Street View app. And with the Street View app, you can use your smartphone to tile a picture so it becomes a 360 panorama, a spherical image that you can then load into this web-based platform for VR called SeekBeak. You can then make various points of that image hotspots interactive, so that when people gaze at that, if they've got a headset on with their own mobile device, or if they're looking at on a computer screen, interaction happens via either mouse clicking or gazing. And so you can make things pop up. You could pop up a YouTube video that's describing something that's in that scene. It could be a text giving more information about part of that scene. It could be even the Internet of Things, so that you can actually link between that virtual environment and the physical environment to internet connected devices. So for example, you could have, say, a thermometer, a Wi-Fi connected thermometer, and in your virtual environment you could have a Internet of Things hotspot that actually remotely polls that thermometer. So you click on it in the VR scenario, it actually gets the real-time temperature from the thermometer over the internet. It doesn't have to be that complex, but these tools are really quite simple to use. If you can use Microsoft Word, you can use SeekBeak in all media. And as I say, they provide free versions which your students can use, and they also provide educational packages which are relatively low cost as well. So just a few hints there of how you could quickly transfer maybe some face-to-face activities into a virtual environment. And my suggestion would be, you don't have to do that yourself. Get students to do that as an assignment activity. So they create these virtual reality scenarios as a project. And so by doing that, you actually end up creating this database of scenarios as well. So it could be, a virtual tour of a classroom. And what are the key things in that classroom, and where are they, or why are they there, etc. And how are they placed? Are they placed badly, etc. It's really up to your own imagination. Or you go, this is a project for your students, and they need to creatively explore a virtual classroom, create and explore a virtual classroom. We've done this for journalism, where we have a virtual tour of a journalism newsroom and its various key elements. Kate, do you want to talk about wikis and journals?
I love wikis and journals. So like you were talking about before with using Wikipedia, if you don't feel safe, I've used for many years, and I've helped other people set up shared wiki textbooks. So everyone's actually developing the textbook together. So I, for the last couple of years, design a VCE resource so that everyone in the learning area of visual art and design produces a wiki textbook for teaching the current VCE guide. You can do wikis inside Canvas nicely, and I've put a couple of links in there. The wikis as lab books have been used in the sciences for many, many, many years. So there's a link to that as well. But to me, they're kind of the same. So, but a journal has a different co-writing purpose. So, if you're teaching co-authoring or doing some collaborative writing, I think a journal space is nice to do, particularly around group reflection, where a wiki has a kind of portability. It's a different way of understanding where you might take it next.
And there's a comment there from Victoria on your post you might want to reply to.
I will.
Okie dokie, cool. So some sort of studio-based types of strategies that may be relevant. I think the idea of using e-portfolios are hugely powerful, particularly in linking face-to-face and remote students. And once again, it's about the students' work, about them creating a portfolio. And I know a lot of, in education, you do develop portfolios. Oftentimes that's, photos of how you're interacting with the students, etc. But, all that can become an e-portfolio as well. It doesn't have to be just physical posters, etc. You can take a photo of the poster you developed and put it into your e-portfolio. And there's some great platforms that you can use that are free or have paid upgrades. So in art and design, Behance is kind of the default one, which is built into the Adobe products. We use WordPress a lot because it's basically WordPress now underpins over a third of the internet. So over a third of the websites on the internet you will find actually use WordPress as their back end. And the reason they do it is really rock solid. It's very customizable and it's freely available. And they haven't sold themselves to Google, Apple, or Amazon, or Microsoft. They're still just WordPress. So my recommendation is WordPress. There's other tools as well. There's one that I haven't used, but Kate showed me, which is Omeka, more for the arts type of community. Looks really, really potentially powerful. And of course, more of a sort of business, maybe, professional type of portfolio would be LinkedIn. And, as an activity, you want your students to have good employability prospects, and perhaps having a LinkedIn portfolio is a key way of doing that, and getting them to actually create a professional looking LinkedIn profile might be a great activity. How do you then, if you're getting all your students to create these e-portfolios, how do you curate them? How do you look at them? How do you give them feedback? Well, you need to bring them all into one space. You don't want to have to be checking, 100 different portfolios every day, which could be a real pain. So you need tools to do that. And thankfully there are tools to do that. A tool I use a lot is Flipboard. Have you used Flipboard, Kate?
Yeah, it's a really lovely one, and schools use it.
Yeah, so it's kind of a magazine style interface. If I jump up here, this is the web-based version of Flipboard. It actually looks a whole lot better on mobile. So I'm just going to show you what Flipboard looks like on my iPad. So this is Flipboard on my iPad, and effectively I've subscribed to a whole variety of different news sites that I'm interested in. As you can see, I'm mainly interested in educational technology, and what Flipboard does is update automatically for me all these sites that I've signed up to via RSS in the background, and it makes it really quite a visual, engaging experience. So it preferences the visual aspect of these blogs, of these news sites, brings that up front so you can quickly see visually, do I really want to go and find out about a truck or not, or etc., and then click on those and find out more. So the cover stories are kind of like a compilation of all the magazines, etc., the news sites that I follow. And so for me, I kind of build this into my daily routine. So when I was on the train each day, an hour and a half on the train, each direction gives me tons of time for looking at news stories or looking at student e-portfolios if I use this tool to subscribe to their portfolios. Now, because I'm at home, I build it into, say, my breakfast routine. So while I'm having my breakfast, I'm checking out my news feeds or downtime that I have. So it's it doesn't become hopefully a whole lot of extra work. But then the cool thing about what we can do with Flipboard is create your own magazines. And these are compilations of feeds. And so I have a magazine here, which is for, as you can see, a bit of a theme, the EDUC 909-70 course, the Flexible Online Learning, Facilitating Online Learning course. And these are basically all the participant blogs and the various activities and tools that we're using collated into what Flipboard calls a magazine. And so we can quickly flip through these, see what's new, see what people have been up to, bring it all into one place. If you've got lots and lots of students, then perhaps Flipboard may not be the best tool for you. something like Feedly, which is a bit more text-based, might be better, which can check a whole, hundreds or thousands of feeds very, very quickly. And it's just loading very slowly for me. Here it comes. You can see I've made a group for the same class, the same students in Feedly. Once again, Feedly's free. Free is good. I like free, and students like free, as long as it doesn't come with nasty surprises. And of course, most of these tools will also have a paid upgrade. That's how they make the money. They either, like Google, sell your information, or they use advertising, or they have a freemium model where if you like the tool, then you'll pay for the paid upgrade. So I basically use the free versions of most things. But here you can see, instead of it being very visually based, you can preference the text, and you can change the mode of how you're seeing things, text only, magazine, or cards. It changes the view. And then I can read through their posts a lot quicker than flipping through the Flipboard magazine. So if I've got lots of portfolios, you can check them very, very quickly, scan through them, seeing who's active, who's not, and see if there's anything that you need to respond to. And it's also, you can focus on peer review and students commenting as well. So build that into the activity.
I've set up the class notebook in Teams to run exactly the same as this for my visual art and design students. So if you set up your Teams site as a class, then you get all of the Microsoft Teams apps, and you have this really nice one called Class Notebook, and it generates folder tabs per student. You have a collab folder and then individual folders, and you can run it just like that. It's actually a really nice addition.
Yes, there's multiple ways of doing it, but the key takeaway, I think, is don't sort of think if you're going to set up e-portfolios as a key activity for your students, that's going to be a whole lot of extra work for you. Just use the technology to do that work for you. Okay, and there's various ways of doing it, and you find the way that works for you. So if Flipboard doesn't do it for you, well, there's other tools that can. And as Kate says, there's tools that are built into Canvas, into Teams, etc., that will do it as well. Or even just on WordPress, you can just use the built-in reader on WordPress or Safari if you're a Mac user, etc. So Kate's got a few comments there, which is great. You can build in perhaps scripts in collaboration to share them with your remote students via, once again, a simple thing is just getting a student there with their smartphone camera and streaming it. You don't have to be in a lecture capture room to do it. It could be anywhere that you've got internet connectivity, and the students can do that for you. Just assign them to do it. Chris got some comments there on parent instructor video feedback. So using video as a format for feedback, you can, once again, if data is a problem, you can do that just simply as audio. Just audio feedback is a great tool as well. Okay, so jumping into ecologies of resources. So I guess my expertise is in mobile learning, and so I tend to preference tools that have a mobile component that I can use on a mobile device. And once again, basically all of your students have a smartphone these days. So if you can link into the tool that they have in their pocket that they're going to bring with them, then that's a way to get them engaged as well. They're not going to necessarily carry around their laptop, and they certainly won't carry a desktop with them, but they will have a mobile phone, and if they don't, there'll be 90% of the rest of the class they can partner with to do that.
Tom, can I just quickly, and I hate to do this, but it is 12:30 our time.
Yes.
So people might have to jump out. They might not. Yes, we are going to share the recording, Marnie. I rudely have to jump out because I have to be in another meeting right now. I am sorry.
No, that's good. I mean, we're almost kind of to the end anyway. I've got a whole variety of resources there, and Kate's added to this as well, but a lot of these are also from University of Melbourne, so just collating those there. But I guess what I would like to just sort of throw out there is, maybe this is just the start of the conversation. If people are interested in specific ideas for their specific course, then, I'm happy to, I'll stop screen sharing now, to have that conversation beyond this brainstorm. And I'm sure Catherine would be as well. So yeah, hopefully this is just the start of brainstorming ideas. And if there's any, burning questions or specific things that people really want to nut out, then feel free to contact me or Kate, and we'll help out where we can.
It's amazing. That Padlet wall is huge. Thank you, Tom.
No worries. It was co-constructed by a few brains, so that was good. Well,
The
thank you,
best
everyone.
things are.
Yeah, I think we'll end the session there and let everyone get on and have your lunch. I'm going to have my afternoon tea.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
We'll send you the link.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
See ya.